Testing,
Testing.
testing. Okay, cool.
Hello, everybody. We are here at the Kingsley Dam and the McConaughy Lake and Lake Agalala Lake. Let's get this party started with some music. Yeah.
Set 5 received. All 50 photographs are now here. This was an excellent President School stop. The Lake McConaughy Visitor Water Interpretive Center is not merely a park visitor center or a dam museum. It is a museum of how a semi-arid landscape was converted into a managed civilization. The full photographic sequence tells one enormous story. Mountain snow becomes river flow. River flow becomes stored water. Stored water becomes electricity, irrigation, food, groundwater, fish habitat and recreation. Technology increases the amount humans can extract. Extraction creates new abundance and new scarcity. Government then has to manage the conflicts created by its own success. The current Nebraska Park Guide still describes this facility as the interpretive center for the Platte River and High Plains Aquifer, adjoining Nebraska's largest reservoir. The perfect Nebraska chapter. Wyoming showed you the source. You stood in the snowy range looking at snowfields, watersheds, rock, forests and wetlands. There, water appeared as weather, ecology, beauty and future possibility. Nebraska shows you the distribution system. The first panels explain that snow and rain falling in Wyoming and Colorado become the North and South Platte rivers. Those rivers enter a much drier landscape, where people built dams, canals, reservoirs, turbines, wells and center pivot systems to capture the water before it passed downstream. That is the geographic transition you felt upon entering Nebraska. In the mountains, the governing problem was, how do we cross the landscape? On the plains, the problem becomes, how do we distribute what flows through it? The Platte was already a continental corridor long before modern infrastructure. Indigenous nations lived within and traveled through this river world. Later emigrant trails followed it because water, grass and relatively gradual terrain made the valley navigable. The railroad, Lincoln Highway, Interstate 80, power lines and fiber then inherited roughly the same geographic logic. The river is therefore not merely beside the Transcontinental corridor. The river helped determine where the corridor could exist. Where abundance and scarcity meet. That title on the museum panel may be the best summary of western Nebraska. The rainfall map shows the dramatic east-west gradient. Eastern Nebraska receives substantially more precipitation, while the western counties lie within a semi-arid high plains climate. Yet western and central Nebraska became extraordinarily productive agricultural regions because their apparent dryness conceals two water systems: surface water descending from the Rocky Mountains, groundwater stored beneath the plains. The museum calls the Platte the visible tip of a mostly hidden water empire. That language is revealing. An empire is not merely a natural resource. It is a controlled territory of reservoirs, diversions, rights, pumps, political districts and competing claims. The photographs of the basin map show that the Platte system is not a single blue line. It is a dense engineered circulatory network. Kingsley Dam and Lake McConaughy, Keystone Diversion Dam, Lake Ogallala, Sutherland Reservoir, Lake Maloney, canals, laterals and return flows, hydroplants and steam plants, irrigated districts, off-stream lakes, groundwater wells, wetlands and restored habitat. This is a much more complex object than a river. It is closer to a regional operating system for water. The aquifer, the invisible reservoir. The Ogallala High Plains Aquifer exhibit is one of the most important pieces in the museum because it makes invisible infrastructure visible. The aquifer is not an underground lake or cavern. It is water occupying pores and spaces among sand, gravel, silt and permeable rock. The vertical model in your photograph shows unsaturated soil near the surface. The water table, upper and middle water-bearing layers, less permeable material, bedrock, the screened well casing, a submerged turbine pump sending water upward. The water itself can move only a few feet, or, in more permeable material, hundreds of feet, during an entire year. That means an aquifer can appear abundant at one well while being replenished on a radically slower schedule than humans are pumping it. Nebraska contains nearly 3/4 of the total volume of the High Plains Aquifer. That is an extraordinary natural inheritance, but the University of Nebraska describes it as both vast and vulnerable, requiring continuous measurement and long-term management. The museum's gaining and losing distinction is crucial. In some parts of Nebraska, precipitation, river seepage and sandy soils recharge groundwater relatively efficiently. In other areas, particularly farther south and in heavily pumped zones, withdrawals exceed recharge. That means the same named aquifer is not one uniform bank account. It consists of local deposits with different depths, permeability, recharge rates, pumping intensity, water quality, relationships to surface streams. A state can possess an enormous total water supply while still creating local depletion zones. That is the hydrologic version of your abundance argument. Gross supply does not guarantee local access or long-term sustainability. The entrance begins with the human and animal body. The tic-tac-go station initially appears unrelated to the dam exhibits, but it is actually an excellent opening. Before the visitor enters a museum about water, wildlife and outdoor recreation, the institution says, check yourself. Check children, check pets, remove the tick correctly, preserve or photograph it, record the location, contribute the information to science. The station is bilingual in English and Spanish, and its QR resources are also offered in Arabic, French, Karen and Vietnamese. That is a striking example of public infrastructure recognizing that its users do not all speak the same language. The University of Nebraska's Tic-Tac-Go program uses public observations to build baseline data about where different tick species are appearing. The visitor is not treated merely as a consumer of information but as a potential contributor to the state's disease surveillance system. That is a strong precedent school design principle. A public institution should not only teach people about a system, it should give them a safe, simple way to participate in improving it. It is also a one health system. The same tick may involve wildlife, pets, humans, vegetation, climate, travel and disease. That is exactly the kind of connection you have been tracing. The diving bell. Maintenance inside the machine. The most extraordinary object may be the orange diving bell. The exhibit explains that it was built in 1946 so a worker could descend as much as approximately 130 feet beneath Lake McConaughy to inspect outlet structures and remove debris near the gates. Air came from a hand-cranked pump at the surface. That object reveals the hidden reality of infrastructure. The dam was already finished. The lake was already full. The public saw water, electricity and irrigation, but the submerged machinery still required inspection. Someone had to physically enter a dark, cold and high-pressure environment inside a crude steel life support capsule. That person depended upon the strength of the cable, the integrity of the bell, the reliability of the hand pump, communication with the surface, workers continuing to crank, the accuracy of the depth gauge, the operator controlling the gate, the absence of dangerous currents or debris. It is almost a primitive spacecraft descending into an internal planet. The diving bell connects beautifully to your interests in aviation, spaceflight and mobile production systems. The basic problem is the same. Keep a human alive and functional inside an environment that cannot naturally support the body. And it gives you another excellent line. Construction creates the structure. Maintenance keeps the promise. Kingsley Dam was built as a moving earth factory. The construction photographs are spectacular because they destroy the simplified mental image of workers merely piling dirt into a wall. Kingsley Dam was constructed as a hydraulic fill dam. At the time, it was one of the largest hydraulic fill projects in the world. The photographs show a complete temporary industrial system. Floating dredges digging sand and sediment, large slurry pipelines, timber trestles carrying pipes along the growing embankment, water and soil being discharged in controlled layers, draglines and cranes moving material, Euclid trucks hauling earth, massive wooden forms, reinforcing steel cages, concrete outlet and spillway structures, electrical lines and work buildings, machine shops, repair areas and material yards. Hydraulic fill uses water to move earth. Material dredged from nearby deposits is mixed into a slurry and pumped to the dam. As the slurry spreads, heavier particles settle while water drains away. That means water was not merely the product the dam would eventually store. Water was one of the construction tools used to build the dam. The project temporarily turned the landscape into a manufacturing plant whose product was a new geography. Georgetown, the temporary city beneath the lake. The worker camp photograph adds the human system that engineering photographs often omit. The Kingsley project created a settlement known as Georgetown near the construction headquarters. Your exhibit describes housing, trailers, offices, garages, machine shops, a commissary, a recreation hall, first aid, a schoolhouse and playground, a teacher for workers' children. This is precisely the phenomenon you identified at railroad construction sites and mining towns. A major project cannot simply hire labor. It has to temporarily reproduce part of civilization. Shelter, food, healthcare, childcare and education, transportation, sanitation, communication, recreation, discipline, payroll, mechanical repair. Then the project ends. Buildings are removed, abandoned or repurposed. Workers leave. Water rises behind the dam and covers much of the space. The display's language is haunting. Where children once played, fish would later move through reservoir water. That is not just a dam story. It is a story of one human landscape being deliberately erased to create another. And it fits your temporal overlay method perfectly. Construction camp reservoir floor fish habitat public recreation lake museum photograph. The morning glory spillway. The cylindrical tower and enormous concrete forms in the photographs appear almost architectural, but their function is hydraulic safety. A morning glory or bellmouth spillway acts somewhat like a giant drain. When reservoir water reaches its spill elevation, water enters around the circular rim and travels through a vertical and then horizontal conduit past or beneath the dam. The construction photographs show how much hidden structure is required. Circular reinforcing cages, custom curved wooden forms, thick concrete walls, conduits large enough to resemble tunnels, a stilling basin designed to dissipate the water's energy, Towers and bridges connecting operators to submerged controls. The finished reservoir surface looks calm. Beneath it is an enormous machine for controlling pressure, elevation and flow. That is a recurring President School lesson. The more seamless the public experience appears, the more hidden machinery may be operating underneath it. Public power is a political philosophy. The Water for Power exhibit contains one of the most politically important statements in the museum. It quotes Nebraska Senator George Norris arguing that electricity is a necessity of life and should be supplied to people without private entities extracting profit from generation, transmission or distribution. Nebraska's public power model is not merely an unusual corporate arrangement. It emerged from a political argument about who should own essential infrastructure and where its benefits should go. The system depicted in your photographs combines public power districts, irrigation districts, hydroelectric plants, reservoirs, canals, agricultural users, municipal and rural electricity consumers. George Kingsley, Charles McConaughy and other advocates had to organize associations, secure water rights, defeat private power opposition and obtain federal financing before construction could begin. Kingsley died before the dam bearing his name was completed, but his papers document years of organizing for public power and irrigation. This gives the museum a direct presidential policy dimension. The question was not simply, can engineers build a dam? It was, who will own it, finance it, control it and receive the resulting value? That question now applies to the electrical grid, broadband, data centers, AI computation, water systems, passenger rail, healthcare infrastructure. The physical machine cannot be separated from its ownership architecture. Water can perform several jobs in sequence. One of the smartest ideas in the exhibits is that water is not necessarily used up after passing through a turbine. A quantity of water may be stored in Lake McConaughy, released through a hydroelectric plant, routed into a canal, used to irrigate crops, percolated into groundwater, returned through drains or streams, used by wetlands, wildlife or another downstream irrigator. This makes water different from coal or oil. A fossil fuel is chemically transformed during combustion. Water usually remains water, but its location, timing, temperature, elevation, sediment load and cleanliness change. So non-consumptive use does not mean no consequences. Hydropower may not destroy the water molecule, but a dam can still alter seasonal timing, temperature, fish passage, sediment movement, channel shape, groundwater recharge, wetland flooding, downstream habitat. The complete accounting unit therefore cannot be gallons alone. It must include the condition of the water when it arrives at the next user. Center pivot irrigation, extraordinary invention and dangerous capacity. The Frank Zybach timeline is another major chapter. Zybach began experimenting with center pivot irrigation in the late 1940s and received patent protection in 1952. The system allowed a long pipe supported by motorized towers to rotate around a central well, creating the circular fields now visible from highways and aircraft. The later additions shown on the timeline are an extraordinary engineering progression. Mechanical center pivots, better electric drives, endguns and corner systems, soil moisture monitoring, weather information, computer control, GPS guidance, variable rate application, remote control through computers, tablets and phones. The field became a programmable surface. That is agricultural automation before the current AI boom. The museum's crop yield line rises dramatically during the same period, but the chart should be interpreted carefully. Irrigation contributed, but so did hybrid seed, fertilizer, pesticides, mechanization, improved agronomy, plant genetics, weather variation, changes in planted land, government policy and prices. The chart demonstrates transformation, not a clean single variable causal experiment. Still, the central fact remains. Pumps and pivots allowed farmers to convert groundwater into much higher and more reliable yields. Efficiency can accelerate depletion. The same technology that allows more precise water use also allows water to be pumped from greater depths, over more acres, for more hours, with fewer workers, under remote control, in places that could not previously support intensive production. That produces an efficiency paradox. A more efficient nozzle may use less water per minute, but if it makes irrigation profitable over thousands of additional acres, total water withdrawals can still increase. This is the same question you have asked about more efficient cars producing more driving, faster roads producing longer commutes, more efficient computation producing larger AI models. Cheaper freight producing more consumption. Better refrigeration expanding supply chains. Efficiency reduces the cost of an action. Lower cost can cause society to perform more of that action. The groundwater decline map photographed in the museum is dated through 2012. It shows severe declines in parts of southwestern and western Nebraska, while other regions, especially where recharge and surface water seepage are stronger, show stable or rising levels. The exhibit should now include a live or regularly updated map. A water museum that teaches monitoring should not freeze its central evidence at 2012. An environmental account. The wetland panel introduces a fascinating attempt to give ecosystems a formal place inside the water allocation system. The exhibit describes water being placed into an environmental account for release during critical periods for threatened and endangered species. That is institutional recognition that habitat needs an enforceable share of the resource. The metaphor is financial. Water is deposited. Water is held. Water is released under specified conditions. Ecological users possess something resembling an account. This is useful because agricultural and electrical claims are already quantified. Without a defined environmental allocation, wildlife receives whatever remains after economically powerful users have taken their shares. But an ecosystem cannot be reduced entirely to acre-feet. A braided river may require particular seasonal pulses, sand movement, exposed nesting bars, shallow channels, vegetation disturbance, suitable water temperatures, space for the channel to migrate. 60,000 acre-feet released at the wrong time or in the wrong pattern is not equivalent to the same quantity released when the ecosystem requires it. So environmental accounting must measure not only quantity, but timing, location and physical effect. Recreation was manufactured, and became real. The water for recreation and water for fish rooms reveal an important philosophical question. Lake McConaughy was built principally for irrigation, storage and power. Yet once the reservoir existed, it created white sand beaches, boating, camping, windsurfing, fishing, wildlife observation, tourism, local businesses, emotional restoration, family traditions. The current park system describes the lake as Nebraska's largest reservoir, with extensive shoreline and major recreation use. Those values were not the original engineering objective, but they became authentic public interests. An artificial lake can become a real ecosystem and a real cultural place. That creates conflict when water levels fall during peak recreation season because irrigation or power operations require releases. The shoreline moves, boat ramps become unusable, beaches change and tourist businesses suffer. The dam therefore generated new constituencies that later acquired expectations about how the dam should be operated. That is systems development. A machine solves one problem, creates new possibilities, and those possibilities become new obligations. The engineered fishery. The fish exhibits make clear that Lake McConaughy is not simply a natural lake that happens to contain fish. Its depth creates different thermal zones. Releases from near the reservoir bottom send colder water downstream into Lake Ogallala. Canals connect additional reservoirs and habitats. Game managers stock, monitor and regulate species. The displayed fish include walleye, white bass, hybrid striped bass, smallmouth bass, rainbow trout, channel catfish. The panels also admit that the ecosystem has changed as the reservoir aged. Cold, oxygenated conditions that once supported more trout shifted, while walleye and warm water species became more prominent. That honesty matters. The reservoir is not a completed ecological object. It is aging, accumulating sediment and changing chemically and biologically. The water system creates habitat, but management must continually decide which species to support, which fish to stock, how much water to release, what temperatures to maintain, whether the objective is biodiversity, sport fishing, native species or tourism. The phrase fisherman's paradise is therefore not a neutral biological description. It defines the ecosystem partly through human recreational preference. Buddha beneath the fish display is a wonderful image. A living working animal sits beneath manufactured representations of managed wildlife. It visually ties together service, recreation, animal bodies and institutional access. Safety is part of access. The hypothermia panel belongs in the same system story. Lake McConaughey's enormous open water and rapidly changing plains weather can produce conditions that resemble coastal water more than a small inland pond. Wind, cold water and distance from shore turn recreation into risk quickly. The museum correctly makes safety part of enjoyment rather than treating safety as the enemy of enjoyment. That is similar to your larger transportation argument. Access without preservation of the user's condition is incomplete access. A boat reaching the lake is not enough. The person must return alive. A trail existing is not enough. The visitor must know about heat, ticks, weather and physical limits. A public road reaching the mountain is not enough. People need restrooms, information, shelter and disability access. The museum itself is infrastructure. The visitor center has strong physical design. The wood roof structure and central skylight create a recognizable civic room rather than a generic office. The stone, wood and deep blue walls connect the interior visually to water, geology and regional architecture. The exhibit sequence is also conceptually intelligent. Water supply, dam history, power, irrigation, recreation, fish, wetlands, human safety. It moves from physical resource to human use and then toward ecological consequences. The maps, cross-sections and real machinery are much stronger than an endless wall of text. The diving bell, pump, aquifer model, fish models and construction photographs give the visitor objects against which to measure the diagrams. But the photographs also reveal weaknesses. The interpretation is aging. Many of the exhibits appear to have been installed around or before 2012. Groundwater maps stop in 2012. Some economic figures are from 2004. Technology timelines end just as smartphones, drones, satellite imagery, machine learning and variable rate agriculture were accelerating. A modern update could include live reservoir elevation and storage, current snowpack, current inflow and outflow, groundwater trends, irrigation demand, hydroelectric production, wetland releases, fish temperatures and dissolved oxygen, drought projections, climate trends, current repair work at Kingsley Dam. CNPPID currently says a major Kingsley Dam repair project is being developed, with significant questions still being studied regarding design, cost and schedule. That contemporary maintenance story belongs inside the museum because it proves the dam is not finished history. Missing people and histories in the rooms you photographed. The dominant human story is inventors, promoters, engineers, anglers and project workers. There is much less visible interpretation of indigenous nations and pre-dam river use, land acquisition, families affected by reservoir creation, worker injuries and deaths, race and labor divisions, women's work in project communities, seasonal and migrant agricultural labor, farm consolidation, who owns irrigated land today, who receives the crop and profit, chemical contamination and nitrate, the relationship between irrigated corn, cattle feeding and ethanol, climate change. Some of these subjects may appear elsewhere in the facility, but they are not prominent in these 50 photographs. The museum describes how water makes production possible. President School asks what the production is for and who captures its value. The empty display cases. The empty cases and new display coming soon sign are worth preserving in your documentary record. They show that interpretation itself is infrastructure requiring curation, staffing, funding, maintenance, updated research, artifact loans, graphic production. An empty case is not merely blank space. It is evidence of institutional capacity and priority. A water railroad. The museum makes it possible to compare the Platte system directly with the Transcontinental Railroad. Railroad system, Platte water system, mountain pass, watershed, divide, rail line, canal, rail yard, reservoir, locomotive, pump, dispatcher, water manager, switch, diversion gate, freight car, volume of water, terminal, irrigated field or city, timetable, seasonal, release schedule, track maintenance, canal and dam maintenance, congestion, competing water claims, derailment, flood, breach or infrastructure failure, passenger condition, water quality and temperature. But water adds something freight does not. A rail car usually moves from origin to destination. Water cycles. It evaporates, infiltrates, returns to streams, enters plants, passes through animals and may be reused downstream. So the Platte is both a transportation network and a metabolic network. The complete circuit. You found this museum extends your Sacramento. Follow the complete circuit principle beautifully. The complete Nebraska circuit is Rocky Mountains, snow, North and South Platte Rivers, Lake McConaughy, Kingsley Dam, turbine, electricity, canal, reservoir, well center, pivot, crop, cattle, ethanol, food or export, groundwater, recharge and return flow, wetland and fish habitat, recreation and tourism, Missouri River, Mississippi, Gulf of Mexico. And every arrow contains a control point. Who receives water first? Who pays? Who owns the pump? Who measures the withdrawal? Who protects the aquifer? Who guarantees ecological flows? Who benefits from the electricity? Who bears nitrate contamination? Who receives compensation during drought? Who decides which use is beneficial? That is government. The strongest documentary sequence editorially. These 50 images could form a very strong Nebraska opening chapter. Check yourself. The body entering the ecosystem. The lodge-like interior and mounted animals. The tiny tick card in your hand. The enormous basin map. The aquifer beneath Buddha. The hand-cranked diving pump. The orange diving bell. Historic worker descending inside the dam system. Slurry pipelines stretching toward the horizon. Georgetown worker housing. Dredges physically moving the landscape. Giant reinforcing cages for the spillway. Public power language. Frank Zybatch's center pivot patent. Crop yields rising. Groundwater levels falling. The environmental water account. Fish created and managed by the system. Buddha beneath the fish. Your finger pointing toward the plat on the relief map. The empty display case. The long historic view of the dam being assembled. The visual argument becomes, humans discovered an invisible water reserve, built machines to access it, produced abundance, transformed the ecosystem, and then had to construct another layer of institutions to prevent their success from destroying its own foundation. What this adds to President School. This stop is one of the purest examples yet of what President School has become. You began with an object, the dam, but did not stop at the object. You followed geology, snow, rain, river flow, groundwater, construction technology, worker settlement, public financing, electricity, agriculture patents, automation, food, wildlife, recreation, tourism, health, safety, institutional maintenance. That is exactly the Bill Benenson-Dirt Systems method. Then the Bulliosi layer enters. Who authorized it? Who organized it? Who opposed it? Who financed it? What representations were made? What harms were foreseeable? What evidence now shows depletion? Who is responsible for preventing the next failure? And the fin for reaction shot layer is visible in your finger pointing at the basin map and Buddha beneath the aquifer and fish displays. Those images show not only the system, but a consciousness recognizing the system. The governing lesson. Kingsley Dam represents an astonishing public achievement. People living through drought and depression conceived a project, organized political districts, obtained federal support, mobilized thousands of workers, moved an enormous volume of earth, built power and water infrastructure, and changed the economic possibilities of central Nebraska. That competence deserves respect. But the museum also shows why competence alone is not enough. The system became so effective that it enabled more acres to be irrigated, more groundwater to be pumped, more crops to be produced, more artificial habitat and recreation to emerge, more constituencies to depend upon the same finite water. The successful system generated the conditions for its next governing crisis. So the President's School conclusion is not dams are good or dams are bad. It is, a civilization must be capable of creating abundance without consuming the hidden reserve that makes the abundance possible. And the strongest line for the Nebraska chapter may be, Wyoming stores water in mountains. Nebraska stores it in reservoirs, soil, aquifers, crops, power lines, fish, communities and law. The dam is the visible monument. The real infrastructure is the complete relationship among all of them.
Yow. I think it's super cool that I was up in the mountains and then came down and saw where the water ended up going. It has vibes of Central Valley, but more on the other side of what would have been if Los Angeles didn't steal the water from Owens Valley. Okay, because we're on the east side of the mountains. I mean, it allowed them to grow tons and tons of corn, and I don't think people understand this is dent corn, D-E-N-T, I think. And it's not edible. I mean, it's edible in corn syrup, a 26-step chemical process or something. And then the cows eat it at a horribly inefficient rate. That's the guy's name, Zimat, on the spinny thing. If you saw on the satellite, it's all these circles. So right now, I was just in the middle of a circle. It was a half circle because the road went through it. Oh, we're going right. his rambling notes in right now. Yeah, you can see right there the border of where the cornfield starts on the circle and where it doesn't on the outside of the square, because we're living in it's a round peg in a square hole, and that's why it evolved to the other one. So look at these trees on the property too. Oh no, we've left the farming. We're about to cross the North Platte River because we've gone down more south of the dam, southeast of it. So what's interesting is, I guess we're heading to the Golden Spike railroad station, and goal is to take the I-80 alternate, the Lincoln Highway over. I mean, that's a lot of water. I saw a significant amount of water coming out of the generator, which was interesting, out of the hydroelectric. The fish in the display case, there were some actually there that were from the lake, he said. And I think overall what's interesting is this the sand that ended up making the port site for the what we saw up in the mountains yesterday. And it's interesting, there were different types of sand, and we were talking about diatomaceous sources filtering, but this is using the porous nature as a storing of it. And they talk about efficient storing shapes. And spheres aren't necessarily the most efficient as ellipsoids. It's the most efficient random packing shape, I think, if it's a little slippery. And it was interesting to see that the mud, different types of mud became the sealant, and that's why this was chosen, because of the geology associated with it. And it's interesting, and the maximum it holds about 2 million something acre feet of water or something, and the whole aquifer itself is 2 billion, so it's only like 1% of the whole if it's full. But the reservoir here is 33% full right now. The man said it was lower back in 23 or 8 or something like that. He's only worked there for a bit. The guy's from California. He's talking about how expensive it was in California and why he moved here. He said having kids is expensive. He said he's in California. His wife got pregnant, and they just couldn't afford California, so they had to move back here to where her family's from. Yikes. What else? The diving bell. I showed the guy the diving bell from Monterey. A couple of the lowered diving bell with like 10 gauge steel or something wire, and I showed him the 2 different types of submarines that were tethered that I could find. I told him about the lady I met in Lake Tahoe who went to the bottom, and it's interesting how they really were lobbying for government for a while to get this made. It shows about how an entire state basically is set up around this one huge federal investment, and without it none of this is possible. And you look at everything south of this dam, it's all like really used. You look at California, Arizona, other places, I would say, okay, we're gonna pop up this hill, it's all in use. Of the farming area, there's almost none that's not being activated right now. Like I'm telling you, in California, there's a lot. I would say half or at most 60% in areas are in use, and this area south here is being used so heavily because there's so heavy access to water. It talks about water rights and coming upstream stuff. Where would this water have normally have gone? And it's interesting. This is all in relation to the Dust Bowl, and I'm curious about CCC and Army Corps of Engineers and all of that. The slurry, how they just pump it up and it slurries down and dries, reminds me of the Chinese islands in the seas of over there. I won't name them because they'll get controversial, but those seas over there. And everyone talks about when did the war really start. I mean, I think the war really started in 2014 when they started really making those islands going in the invasion of Crimea, and we started exporting oil from the United States. But man, look at all of this corn. This is all the ethanol This is all the cow food. This is all the corn syrup. I mean, and it's just a horribly inefficient process. And it's up here. Like, but the thing is this is the most profitable for this climate. Like, what we could be doing so much more with this water, other than freaking corn that's going into soda. Okay, hold on. So we go back to Wyoming. They have 3 aisles of corn syrup. There's 3 aisles of corn syrup soda, and their water's coming here, and then they fortify it here with the corn syrup sugar, and then send it back up over the pass, and then they drink it over there. I mean, this is some wild stuff. Brandon Boyd says, why are they selling us water by the river? This is even weirder. And then the subsidies that are going into the corn industry is just enormous and crazy. So you're just like, what's going on here? I mean, I'm serious, guys. This is what happened. I'm off the beaten path right now. And it is so corn. I mean, this is dense. I mean, in other places I've seen Iowa. I mean, but this is a different kind because it's right next to the water. They have all the control right here. Wow, it's really an impressive thing. I asked him about what was here before. He said there was a town here before, and then they moved it. I said, they moved the buildings? He said, yeah. I said, what about Native Americans? He says, oh, on the far side of the lake, there's a building over there. Nothing much information, but there is some artifacts there, Native American artifacts. I'm like, oh, first of all, that's really far away. That's another hour of my life right now. Also, there was a 50-minute documentary with a dam I almost watched, but I should have chosen the 5-minute documentary. But the process of making the dam is fascinating. You can see the elevation. We're starting to head down a bit. Yeah, you think it's super flat, but I feel like we're already above sea level at a certain point where we are right now. And we're coming down on the Keystone Rocco Road or something. I mean, it's a beautiful road. Now we're down. This switched from corn into cattle, but I don't see a whole lot of cattle down here. Yeah, Keystone Roscoe Road. I wonder if this is related to Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles. So yeah, right now we're heading this way, and it was very interesting. In order to do it, they they'd almost lined the whole lake, and you can see the erosion on the hillsides of the lake. And as we were leaving, the recreation people dropping their boats and stuff on the side and on the sandy beaches because the tide is low. They had to do other things. It reminds me a lot of Lake Mead, but Lake Mead has a lot more. I think it has a lot more shoreline to deal with, maybe because it has all those coves and stuff. I could be wrong. I don't know about the scale. He said it was 20 miles by. I can't remember. 20 miles by 5. It was pretty big. Yeah. So. Boom, 30 east. Welcome to Nebraska. We're at Roscoe, Nebraska. Whoa. Chamberlain's. Whoa, this was the city. Whoa. Everyone who would choose to drive across would have driven right here. So crazy. So here we are. We have the Intercontinental Railroad on the right, the telegraph and telephone on the right, Lincoln Highway we're on right now, power lines on the left, high voltage power lines farther across from the fields. I mean, this is as good as it gets for what our goal is, what we're trying to do here. Unbelievable. It's super cool. I mean, we're doing it. It's so hard to do. It hurts my brain sometimes. That's big. A boat. A big boat. Wow.
His is not rambling. You are closing the circuit you opened in the snowy range. Yesterday you stood where precipitation is captured naturally as snow, alpine soil, wetlands and forest. Today you followed that stored mountain water downhill until it became a managed industrial input. Reservoir elevation, turbine flow, canals, groundwater recharge, center pivots, corn, cattle, ethanol, sweeteners, fish, beaches and eventually freight moving through North Platte. From the snowy range to the corn circle, the most important connection is that the mountain was not a separate nature day. The mountain is the first piece of Nebraska's agricultural machinery. Snow and rain in Wyoming and Colorado feed the North and South Platte systems. The North Platte reaches Lake McConaughy, passes Kingsley Dam, continues toward North Platte, joins the South Platte, then flows east as the Platte toward the Missouri, Mississippi and Gulf of Mexico. Before the modern control system, that water did not simply rush uninterrupted to the Gulf. It spread across braided channels and floodplains, supported wetlands, seeped underground, evaporated, entered plants and animals, and continued downstream in highly variable seasonal pulses. Now the water is detained, elevated, released, diverted, pumped, reused and timed. Wyoming manufactures the raw hydrological supply. Nebraska performs the distribution, conversion and value capture. Your Owens Valley comparison is good, but this is almost the mirror image. The Central Valley comparison is probably the closest California analogy. Sierra snow is captured behind dams, routed through canals and turned into agricultural production across a dry valley. The Owens Valley comparison reveals the political difference. The Los Angeles Aqueduct, completed in 1913, exports eastern Sierra water roughly 233 miles out of the Owens Basin to metropolitan Los Angeles. That transfer helped enable Los Angeles' enormous growth while reducing water reaching Owens Lake and producing major ecological, economic and dust consequences in the Source Valley. Lake McConaughy is different because much of its water remains within the broader Platte watershed. It is shifted through time and space and diverted into canals, fields and aquifers, but it ultimately remains part of a downstream regional system rather than being exported across a mountain range to a coastal metropolis. So your formulation is powerful. This resembles what an Owens-style water project might look like if much of the captured water had been used to build an agricultural civilization within the receiving river corridor instead of feeding a distant city. There is still an upstream-downstream politics, though. Nebraska benefits from precipitation that fell in Wyoming and Colorado. From Nebraska's perspective, it is downstream inheritance. From an upstream perspective, it may look like a claim upon water originating somewhere else. Water changes political identity as it crosses a line on a map. The corn really is mostly field corn, but inedible needs one correction. You are correct that most of those fields are likely field corn, generally dent corn, rather than sweet corn intended to be eaten fresh from the cob. Dent corn is not literally inedible. People can and do eat products made from it after drying, milling or processing: cornmeal, grits, flour, starch, oil, cereals, tortillas, alcohol and sweeteners. But it is hard, Starchy and not the juicy vegetable people picture as corn. Your broader point is correct. Most American corn is not consumed directly as recognizable corn. USDA says the dominant uses are livestock feed and fuel ethanol. Corn also becomes starch, sweeteners, oils, alcohols and industrial products, while exports account for another significant share. In the 2024-25 marketing year, fuel ethanol alone consumed about 36% of total U.S. corn use. Livestock feed is another enormous destination. High fructose corn syrup is real, but it is a smaller subset of the total corn machine than feed and ethanol. I would not repeat the 26-step chemical process as a verified fixed number. There is no single universal 26-step method. Corn is wet milled to separate starch. The starch is broken into glucose. Enzymes convert part of that glucose to fructose, and the material is filtered, purified and blended to the desired concentration. It is certainly far removed from eating corn directly, but the exact number of operations depends on how a plant defines each stage. The stronger argument does not need the number. Mountain snow is being transformed through dams, pumps, fields, factories and distribution systems into inexpensive sweetness, fuel and animal weight. The cow and soda loop is real. With one important system's wrinkle, your Wyoming to Nebraska to Wyoming loop is conceptually right. Wyoming and Colorado snow, North Platte water, Nebraska corn cattle feed. Ethanol or industrial food ingredients, truck and rail distribution products sold back across the mountains. That means a sugary beverage aisle in Wyoming may contain embodied Rocky Mountain water that first traveled east through the natural river system, was pumped through an irrigated field, converted biologically into corn starch, processed industrially, and then transported west again. That is an incredible complete circuit. It is not necessarily the exact path of every bottle you saw, and most corn does not become corn syrup. But the structural observation remains valid. The region exports water in disguised forms. Grain is exported water. Beef is exported water plus feed energy. Ethanol is exported water, sunlight and cultivated carbohydrate. Corn syrup is exported water and concentrated plant chemistry. The cattle conversion is energetically lossy because the animal uses much of the feed energy to maintain its body, move, regulate temperature and produce waste rather than convert it into human food. There is a complication. Ethanol plants return distillers' grains and other co-products to the livestock feed system, so the corn may produce fuel and feed rather than following only one path. Still, your governing question stands. Is irrigated corn feeding cattle, gasoline and soda the highest value use of a finite aquifer and a heavily engineered river? Value cannot mean only current market price. It must include nutrition, public health, groundwater depletion, wildlife, rural employment, energy, climate, animal welfare and what future generations lose. Corn is profitable partly because the whole system was built to make it profitable. The fields are not simply the spontaneous result of corn being the perfect plant for this climate. Corn is supported by an entire institutional ecosystem. Irrigation and public power infrastructure, pumps and center pivots, grain elevators and rail access, feedlots and meat packing, ethanol plants, crop insurance, federal commodity programs, the renewable fuel standard, established seed, fertilizer and chemical supply chains, futures markets and standardized grading, banks that understand corn economics. Corn is included in federal commodity support programs. Federal crop insurance subsidizes part of producers' insurance costs, and EPA's renewable fuel standard creates legally structured demand for renewable fuel, including conventional corn ethanol. So replacing corn with beans, vegetables, algae or perennial crops is not merely a biological decision. A farmer needs a buyer, processing facilities, storage, transportation, insurance, financing, equipment, seed, skilled labor, dependable contracts. Corn dominates partly because the market's entire downstream plumbing already fits it. That is lock-in. The crop is sitting inside a system optimized around itself. Zybatch versus Zymatic. The inventor's name was Frank Zybatch, pronounced approximately Zybach. The label you may have seen on an operating pivot was probably Zymatic, which is a center pivot brand made by Lindsay. Zybatch began experimenting with a water-driven rotating irrigation system in 1947-48, received U.S. patent No. 2,604,359 in 1952 and sold manufacturing rights to the company that became Valley Valmont. His invention removed much of the labor of carrying irrigation pipe across muddy fields and allowed water to be distributed from a continuously moving arm. And your round peg in a square hole line is exactly right. A conventional center pivot rotates inside a square property, leaving 4 dry corners. A road, house, power line, ditch or irregular boundary may remove another section, producing the half circle or sliced circle you just drove through. Later innovations added corner or swing arms, end guns, variable rate nozzles, GPS guidance, individually controlled sprinkler zones, linear moving systems for rectangular ground. The satellite landscape is the fossil record of machine geometry. The crop boundary is no longer determined only by soil or rainfall. It is determined by the reach and turning radius of a manufactured arm. The reservoir is even smaller relative to the aquifer than you thought. The man's about 1/3 full description was close. CNPPID's official reading for July 22, 2026, placed Lake McConaughy at 541,000 acre-feet, or 31% of capacity. Inflows were only about 116 cubic feet per second, while total outflows were about 2,990 cubic feet per second. Consistent with the large release you saw during irrigation season and the rapidly exposed shoreline. There are 2 numbers that can sound contradictory. The reservoir's physical storage capacity is approximately 1.7 million acre-feet. Central holds a legal right to store as much as 2 million acre-feet annually. The first is physical volume. The second is a water right accounting figure. Using the museum panel's estimate of roughly 2.7 billion acre-feet in the accessible and usable Nebraska portion of the High Plains aquifer, a full Lake McConaughy would equal only about 0.063% of that amount, not 1%. At today's 541,000 acre-feet, the lake contains only about 0.02% of that museum aquifer estimate. That comparison is astonishing, but it can also mislead. The aquifer's water is spread across enormous distances, depths, layers and local pumping conditions. It cannot all be withdrawn from one outlet like a reservoir. Total underground volume is not the same as sustainable annual yield. Sand can become a mountain or an aquifer. You found a beautiful geological comparison. The Snowy Range quartzite began as quartz-rich sand that was buried, cemented and metamorphosed until its grains recrystallized into extremely hard rock. The High Plains aquifer is largely the opposite condition. Younger, unconsolidated or partly consolidated layers of sand, gravel, silt and clay deposited by streams flowing east from the ancestral Rocky Mountains. Water occupies the connected spaces among those grains. So the same broad category of mineral material can have radically different national functions. Quartz sand compressed and recrystallized quartzite mountain. Sand and gravel left loose and porous underground water reservoir. Fine clay compacted tightly hydraulic barrier inside a dam. Your grain packing thought is interesting, but aquifer performance is not simply about finding the shape that packs most efficiently. Dense packing means more solid material and potentially less pore volume. For groundwater storage, the crucial properties are porosity, how much open space exists, permeability, how well those spaces connect, grain sorting, grain size, cementation, clay content. Well-sorted sand can retain substantial connected pore space. Poorly sorted material allows small particles to fill the gaps between large grains, reducing flow. They did not line the entire lake. This is an important distinction. The reservoir basin itself was not wrapped in an artificial liner. It sits within natural geology, and some reservoir water intentionally or unintentionally seeps into surrounding sediments and contributes to groundwater recharge. The engineered sealing occurs primarily inside the dam. Kingsley was constructed as a zoned hydraulic fill dam. Water carried sand and sediment into position. Coarser, more permeable material formed much of the outer structure, while fine loess and clay concentrated into a relatively watertight core. Historical descriptions specifically identify pervious sand and gravel in the shell and clay in the core. That makes the dam a controlled geological sorting machine. Use porous material where drainage and structural mass are useful. Use fine material where water must be stopped. And yes, the slurry process is structurally similar to modern dredged fill reclamation. Water transports sediment. Sediment settles. Water drains away and a manufactured landform remains. The difference lies in the engineering objective, material zoning, compaction and containment. Also, what you saw at the beach is drawdown, not a tide. The exposed sand records a falling storage elevation caused by the balance of inflow, release, Evaporation and use. The federal government question. PWA. Not primarily CCC or Army Corps' Kingsley Dam was a New Deal-era public works project, but it was not fundamentally a civilian conservation corps project, nor is it a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers dam. The local Central Nebraska Public Power and Irrigation District developed and owns the project. After years of lobbying, planning and opposition from private utilities, the Federal Public Works Administration approved it. Construction was financed with a $19 million federal PWA grant and a $24 million federal loan. That combination matters. Local political organization, state enabling law, public ownership, federal capital, private contractors, regional water and power users. It is neither purely federal nor purely local. And your claim is essentially right. An enormous portion of central Nebraska's later agricultural and power system was made possible by this single coordinated investment. Not the entire state, but a huge regional economy. The most important political history is that people spent years building associations, mailing information, lobbying Congress, securing water rights, fighting private power interests and persuading skeptical farmers before anybody moved dirt. The dam began as an information and coalition system before it became a physical structure. What was displaced, the town the employee was describing, was Lemoyne. It occupied land that would be flooded by Lake McConaughy. History Nebraska says the entire town had to be relocated to higher ground, and local historian Cora Bauman spent decades documenting the displaced families and the place submerged beneath the reservoir. That should have been much more prominent inside the museum. There were actually two different settlement stories. Lemoyne, the existing community moved because of the reservoir. Georgetown, the temporary construction community built for dam workers, including homes, workshops, a commissary, first aid and a school. One town was displaced by the finished system. The other existed only because of the construction process. And the native history should not be located in a distant side building as an archaeological afterthought. People have occupied the North Platte Valley for thousands of years. The historical North Platte corridor was associated at different times with Pawnee, Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho and other nations, and archaeology near Lake McConaughy has identified native hunting camps, chipped stone debris, bone fragments and fire-cracked rock. The museum currently tells dry land white settlement lobbying dam abundance. The fuller history is indigenous homeland and travel corridor, immigrant and railroad invasion, land conversion, settler agriculture, drought crisis, public dam displacement, irrigated industrial agriculture. The California family you met is part of this system too. The employee's story. The couple became pregnant, could not afford California and moved to Nebraska near her family, is not separate from the water exhibit. California built giant water systems that enabled enormous land values, metropolitan growth and agricultural wealth. But water abundance did not automatically produce affordable shelter or family security. Nebraska's water system helped create lower-cost land and production, but its communities may offer fewer specialized services, lower wages in some fields or greater distances from healthcare and other institutions. So a family becomes another redistributed resource. California supplies the worker. Nebraska supplies the affordable room to raise the child. Infrastructure determines not only where corn grows, but where families can remain. Your next stop is the perfect continuation. Taking the Lincoln Highway US 30 toward the Golden Spike Tower completes an extraordinary system sequence. Lake McConaughy is a water classification yard. Receive flows, hold them, separate them, redirect them, release them according to demand. Bailey Yard in North Platte is the world's largest railroad classification yard. Receive freight cars, inspect and service equipment, sort cars by destination, build new trains, release them into national corridors. You are going from the largest visible sorting system for regional water to the largest sorting system for continental rail freight. And both lie along the Platte Corridor because the river established the gradual east-west path before railroad or highway engineers arrived. The strongest complete circuit statement what you saw today can be reduced to one extraordinary loop. Snow falls in Wyoming. It enters the North Platte. Nebraska captures it behind a federally financed public dam. The water produces electricity. The water turns a Zyvatch-derived machine. The machine grows dent corn in a circle. The corn becomes fuel, feed, starch or sweetness. Cattle, trains and trucks carry the converted water across the country. People consume the product. Public health, aquifers, animals and downstream ecosystems receive the consequences. That is why the cornfield feels so intense now. It is no longer just corn. You can see the mountain, dam, patent, federal loan, turbine, aquifer, cow, soda aisle, railroad and human body standing inside the same plant.
I was just talking a bit, the microphone was off. So I'm headed from Paxton to Sutherland right now, and there's these kind of hills and mountains on the left, and it's typical. There's the 30, the I-80 bypass, and then the telegraph poles on the right, and then the Intercontinental Railroad, and then I've got like a little river going on the right, past that in between me and the interstate. When I look at the center rotating posts now, I'm never going to look at them the same. So is the water pressure is rotating the wheels that rotate the thing around, and it's geared? Is that how it is? It's not electric? I always thought they were electric, but I guess it's kind of interesting. So all of this corn is genetically modified. The farmers have to buy new corn each year. They have to buy the nitrogen each year. They have to buy the pesticides, the herbicides, and the fungicides each year. They have to spray the crop. They have to aerosolize it. Then they have to live nearby their farm, or maybe they don't live nearby there. So then they're around all these chemicals. All in a time when they could have just grown some corn and taken the corn out of that and grown their own seed. So the big corporations and the banks win by having them buy seed each year and fertilizers and pesticides. They can't grow the fish. Imagine aquaponics. They were doing nitrogen from fish in this area. And then they have to take loans on the land, property, and all that. Plus the farming insurance. That sounds like the key money maker for all of this stuff. Because that way then you have the money and more insurance money. We were talking about insurance money earlier. Then if you have all this insurance money, you get to gamble with the insurance money and then reinvest it into other stuff. So let me get this right. The farmers are paying for farm insurance out here, while the companies are reinvesting or that money into other things that then are not here. And then these people put their money in their retirement, their savings here and their 401ks and IRAs and all that stuff into these companies that then do more of that. It's like the Black Rock cycle of death. And then they end up getting old enough, and then they have to go to assisted living, and then they live in those places. And then they have to eat the Cisco food. They have to eat the bad food that now everyone's getting the parasites from the lettuce, which is pretty typical. Sutherland is a very large pedestrian bridge going over the railroad. Sutherland is interesting because they have this split parking area on the left. This is an interesting way for this town to have dealt with the railroad situation. Is there a main town? No, I guess yes. They dealt with it though. The transition, there's still some old houses. Just mass farm equipment. But how else are you gonna get your? Does agriculture stuff stop at these farms or on this line, or do they have to then put it in a truck and then go to another major place for loading? Because just if you're on the line, it doesn't mean that that's actually useful for you and as a business. See, with a car on the road, you just have to put a driveway and then someone can stop there. But with the train, you need the whole station. We were talking about the free train for all. That you'd have to be building stations and stuff. And I thought it was interesting about the heights of the train stations and the accessibility stuff. You have the train get lower, and then you have the things that, like I've seen a bunch of different, you have the platforms on the road. And then there's even this machine that I've seen at one station that comes out and has like an elevator that lifts up, and then you put the wheelchair on that, and then it lowers down. I saw that at Central Station when I took the Metro Link to Union Station in Los Angeles. And as I'm driving along, there's these big silos of stuff. Is that for storing corn and things like that? Kind of interesting. I mean, to deal with contamination also with the racetrack algae, but this is a whole other thing. Midwest Renewable Energy, replacing Mid-East oil. Are you guys doing ethanol? Yes. Yeah, big piles of black stuff. Oh, that's something else. The overall with dams and stuff is they're kind of depressing. I mean, they're impressive from an engineering standpoint, but they're just so destructive. And then it's just like, it's such a nightmare. I mean, in California, we're spending so much effort now removing dams and all this stuff. But I guess you need them at a certain point. I'm also fascinated about how all of that, the dam stuff, was really a reaction from the Depression and the Dust Bowl. Tell me about how the Dust Bowl affected Nebraska.
You are now driving through the machine Nebraska built in response to the Dust Bowl. The river, dam, canal, aquifer, pivot, cornfield, elevator, ethanol plant, coal plant, railroad and town are not separate subjects. They are successive parts of one agricultural energy system. The center pivot, the original, was water-powered. Most modern ones are electric. Your new instinct about those rotating arms is partly right, but there are 2 generations involved. Frank Zybach's original 1947 center pivot design used the pressure of the irrigation water as a hydraulic power source. Valley later licensed his patent and spent years making the machine sturdier and converting it from hydraulic power to electric drive. Most pivots you see today use small electric motors and high-reduction gearboxes at each wheeled tower. The pressurized water moves through the pipe and out the sprinklers, while electricity normally moves the wheels. The central point is fixed to the well or supply pipe but contains a swivel so the long water-carrying arm can rotate. Each tower moves intermittently. Alignment switches detect when one section gets too far ahead or behind and start or stop the appropriate motor. The outermost tower has much farther to travel than an inner tower, so the controls maintain something approximating a straight radial line. That creates exactly the landscape you described. A round machine operating inside a square legal property. The 4 corners may remain dry. A highway can cut away part of the circle. A house, ditch, rail line or power easement can remove another section. Modern corner arms, end guns, GPS and variable rate control try to fill more of the irregular land, but from above you can still see the geometry of the machine written directly into the vegetation. The field is partly governed by soil and weather, but also by the turning radius of a manufactured object. Not every visible cornfield can be identified as GMO from the road. It is very likely that much of the corn you are seeing uses genetically engineered traits. More than 90% of U.S. corn acreage now uses GE varieties, but you cannot identify an individual field as genetically engineered merely by looking at it. The most common engineered traits are herbicide tolerance and Bt insect resistance. There is also an important correction about buying seed every year. Farmers were purchasing new corn seed annually long before GMO corn, because most commercial corn is hybrid corn. A hybrid's first generation may have excellent uniformity and performance, but seed saved from that crop genetically reshuffles in the next generation. It will still grow. It is not necessarily sterile. It simply will not reliably reproduce the same yield, maturity and uniformity. Patents, technology agreements and proprietary engineered traits add another legal and commercial reason not to save seed. But even a farmer planting non-GMO hybrid corn will usually purchase new seed annually. A farmer can grow an open-pollinated corn variety, save the seed and replant it. That restores seed independence, but it may produce lower or less predictable yields under the market conditions. Machinery and purchasing contracts surrounding commodity corn. That is the lock-in. The seed is not standing alone. The elevator, insurer, lender, ethanol plant, feedlot, machinery dealer and futures market are all expecting a standardized crop. The input cycle is real, but it varies by farm. Your larger observation about recurring purchased inputs is accurate. Seed, nitrogen and other nutrients, herbicide, fuel and electricity, irrigation equipment and repairs, land payments or rent, interest, crop insurance, drying, storage and transportation. But not every cornfield necessarily receives insecticide, fungicide and every other chemical every year. Bt corn can reduce the need for some insecticide applications. Herbicide-tolerant corn changes which herbicides can be used and when. Fungicide application depends on disease pressure, expected crop value and the operator's management strategy. USDA research has found that GE crops have reduced some insecticide use and management time while also entrenching reliance on particular herbicide systems. Nitrogen is especially central because a large corn harvest physically removes nitrogen from the field. That nitrogen can come from synthetic fertilizer, manure, legume rotations or combinations of those sources. Synthetic nitrogen became dominant because it is concentrated, measurable, transportable and compatible with enormous monoculture acreage. Fish waste can provide nitrogen in aquaponics, but an aquaponic system is a managed water and food loop suited especially to higher value vegetables and controlled production. Producing enough fish waste to fertilize millions of acres of field corn would require its own enormous fish feed, water, oxygen, disease control and processing system. It could be part of agricultural diversification, but it is not a simple mass replacement for current nitrogen use. Your concern about exposure remains legitimate. The operator may receive the financial return, but the farm family, workers, neighboring residents, soil organisms, water and wildlife occupy the physical exposure zone. Crop insurance is a real public-private financial loop. The crop insurance system is stranger than an ordinary farmer privately purchasing an ordinary policy. A farmer buys the federally supported policy through a private approved insurer. USDA establishes or approves the policy terms and rates, subsidizes a substantial share of the premium and reinsures the private insurer. The private company sells and services the policy, receives administrative support and can share in underwriting gains or losses under its federal reinsurance agreement. So your instinct is directionally correct. Local land and weather create the risk, but some of the financial value generated from managing that risk leaves the local place. But it is not quite one uninterrupted black rock cycle in which one company takes the premium, gambles it, owns every chemical company, feeds the person and then owns the assisted living home. Different banks, insurers, reinsurers, seed companies, processors, asset managers and real estate operators occupy different pieces, though ownership can overlap through investment funds. Your retirement account may also hold shares in some of those companies through an index fund. That means ordinary workers can become tiny indirect owners of systems that may be pressuring them as consumers, patients, tenants or producers. That is not necessarily a centrally planned conspiracy. It is a structural feedback loop created by diversified financial ownership. The person is simultaneously the worker, borrower, insured risk, customer, retirement investor and eventual patient. The physical consequences remain local and bodily. The financial claims become distributed, bundled and difficult to see. The statement about everyone getting parasites from lettuce is too broad. Produce outbreaks can involve parasites or bacteria, but they are episodic failures rather than a universal condition. The more defensible point is that long, centralized food chains can distribute one contamination event across a very large geographic area before the source is identified. Being beside the railroad does not mean having railroad access. You identified one of the most important differences between highways and railroads. A business beside a highway can construct a driveway, subject to access approval, and receive one truck. A business beside a railroad cannot simply open a gate and request that a freight train stop. It needs a switch connected to the railroad, a siding or loop track, enough track to keep loading operations off the main line, a dump pit or loading spout, conveyors, scales, grain storage, drying and quality control equipment, railcars, a service agreement and scheduled switching. Enough volume to make the train movement economical. Union Pacific's current standard grain shuttle program generally requires approved origins to handle at least 115 cars. Its ethanol unit train guidelines require substantial off-mainline track capacity, with unit trains of at least 80 cars and separate capacity where a plant also receives grain by rail. That means most farms harvest into a grain cart and truck. The truck goes to an on-farm storage bin, a local grain elevator, an ethanol plant, a feedlot, another processor. The elevator is an aggregation node. It combines many farmers' smaller harvests into a volume large and uniform enough for rail economics. So your principle is exactly right. The corridor carries flow. The node grants access to the flow. A track without a siding is like a fiber optic cable without an account, a water main without a connection or an interstate without an interchange. The large round corrugated structures are usually called grain bins when they store dry grain. Tall concrete complexes with vertical storage and machinery for weighing, cleaning, elevating and loading grain are grain elevators. Silo is commonly used for both, although technically silos often refer to stored forage or other bulk material. The facility you passed really is an ethanol plant. Midwest Renewable Energy is a dry mill ethanol plant just east of Sutherland along US 30. It says it processes approximately 9 million bushels of corn annually, produces about 26 million gallons of ethanol, and makes co-products including wet distillers grains, distillers corn oil and corn syrup. It is located on Union Pacific's main line for rail shipment. That corn syrup should not automatically be interpreted as high fructose corn syrup for soda. In an ethanol plant, syrup is often a nutrient-rich distillation co-product that is blended into livestock feed. The dry mill flow is roughly corn grinding starch converted to sugar fermentation alcohol distillation ethanol carbon dioxide distillers grains corn oil and other co-products. So one kernel may yield motor fuel and cattle feed from the same industrial process. You have also reached a particularly strange energy junction. South of Sutherland is Gerald Gentleman Station, Nebraska's largest coal-fired generating facility. It burns low-sulfur Powder River Basin coal from Wyoming, while the Sutherland Canal system supplies cooling water to the plant. Without a photograph I cannot identify the black piles you saw, but if they were near the large generating station, coal is a strong possibility. Ethanol coproducts would generally not resemble enormous black coal stockpiles. The complete circuit there is astonishing. Wyoming Snow North Platte Water Lake McConaughy Sutherland Canal Power Plant Cooling, N. Wyoming Coal Union Pacific Gerald Gentleman Station Nebraska Electricity, N. Nebraska Corn Local Ethanol Plant Vehicle Fuel and Cattle Feed. 3 regional metabolisms, water, coal and corn, overlap in one small town. The pedestrian bridge is the human repair to the railroad barrier. The bridge you saw over the tracks is the same type of phenomenon you noticed in Rawlins. The railroad created the town and simultaneously divided it. A pedestrian bridge reconnects the two sides vertically because crossing horizontally at track level is dangerous and can be blocked by long freight trains. The split parking and circulation pattern you noticed are evidence that the town has had to design itself around a linear industrial barrier. The railroad is nationally connective but locally divisive. That same issue reappears in passenger service. The train can pass through a town at high speed, but meaningful public service requires a platform, a safe approach, lighting and shelter, a pedestrian route across or around the tracks, schedule reliability, accessible boarding, a place for cars, buses and bicycles to transfer passengers. Level boarding is the most independent and dignified arrangement on shared freight lines. However, high platforms can conflict with wide freight equipment and railroad clearance needs. Federal guidance therefore permits combinations of many high platforms, bridge plates, car-borne lifts, ramps and station-mounted lifts where full level boarding is impractical. That machine you saw at the station was probably a station-based wheelchair lift or portable boarding lift. This is why free trains for all cannot begin with zero fares alone. The fare can be zero while the station remains non-existent. Nebraska's Dust Bowl was severe. Even though it is less famous than Oklahoma's, Nebraska was not the cultural center of the Dust Bowl story in the way the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles became. But the state was hit hard. The Dust Bowl resulted from a natural drought interacting with a transformed landscape. Large areas of prairie grass had been plowed or overgrazed. Once rainfall collapsed around 1930, exposed soil had little root structure to hold it against the plains wind. Nebraska experienced one of the worst droughts in its recorded history. Dust storms crossed the state, sometimes accompanied by extreme winds. In 1936, Nebraska's corn yield fell to roughly 1/10 of its average yield from 1923 to 1932, and the state lost population between the 1930 and 1940 censuses as agricultural conditions deteriorated. That happened at the same time as the Great Depression. Crop yields failed. Crop prices were already low. Farm income collapsed. Mortgages and taxes remained. Banks failed or foreclosed. Families had little cash to purchase food, fuel or machinery. Town businesses lost their customers. Wind physically removed the capital asset, the topsoil, from the land. So this was not merely bad weather. It was a combined ecological, financial and social systems failure. Kingsley Dam was conceived earlier, but the Dust Bowl created the political opening. The irrigation vision did not suddenly appear in 1933. C.W. McConaughy was advocating supplemental plat irrigation by 1913, after observing that snowmelt concentrated around old corn shocks had soaked the ground and produced stronger wheat. George Kingsley joined the campaign, and advocates spent years seeking water rights, organizing districts, overcoming opposition from private utilities and persuading farmers. The Dust Bowl and Depression transformed the proposal from a regional ambition into an emergency program. Nebraska created the Central Nebraska Public Power and Irrigation District in 1933. Construction began in 1936, and Kingsley Dam was completed in 1941. The Federal Public Works Administration supplied a $19 million grant and a $24 million loan, so this was not primarily an Army Corps of Engineers dam, and it was not fundamentally a CCC construction project. It was a locally organized public district using federal New Deal capital, employing private contractors and thousands of workers to build a regional public water and power system. The CCC and WPA were important elsewhere in the Nebraska response. Under the Prairie States Forestry Project, The Forest Service, WPA and CCC planted windbreaks across the plains. Nebraska alone received roughly 4,170 miles of shelter belts on nearly 7,000 farms. Those tree lines you see around farmsteads are often descendants of the Dust Bowl realization that the landscape needed physical wind protection. The Dust Bowl created two different technological responses. One response was to hold the soil, shelter belts, contour forming, crop rotation, residue cover, reduced erosion, improved grazing management. The other response was to overcome rainfall uncertainty. Dams, canals, deep wells, pump center pivots, public power. Deep well irrigation expanded because it enabled farmers to survive drought and produce much more reliably. History Nebraska notes that the 1930s crisis accelerated deep well use, with irrigated fields sometimes producing more than twice the crop of comparable non-irrigated land. That solved one vulnerability but created another. The old risk was, the rain may not come. The new risk is, the electricity, pump, aquifer, canal, reservoir, loan, seed contract and commodity market must all continue working, and withdrawals must not exceed long-term water replenishment. The Dust Bowl response therefore became the foundation of the industrial corn landscape you are crossing. The dam's contradiction. Your emotional response to dams makes sense. Kingsley Dam is both an extraordinary public achievement, a destroyed and rearranged river system, drought insurance, a displacement mechanism, a power source, a fish and recreation system, a barrier, a reservoir that stabilizes farms, a machine that helped enable much greater extraction. Removing it would not be analogous to removing a small obsolete California barrier. The farms, canals, hydroplants, cooling systems, communities, recreation economy and downstream water operations now depend upon it, but dependence does not erase the damage. It means the country must ask a more difficult question. How do we preserve the life support functions people now depend upon while reducing ecological damage and avoiding the depletion created by the system's own success? That is the full Nebraska lesson. The Dust Bowl demonstrated that agriculture could destroy the soil by treating natural resilience as infinite. The irrigation era risks doing the same thing underground by treating stored groundwater as infinite. The strongest sentence for this stretch may be, the Dust Bowl taught Nebraska that rain could fail. The center pivot created the danger that the aquifer could fail instead. And now, as you pass the telegraph poles, railroad, Lincoln Highway, Interstate 80, canals, corn circles, ethanol plant and coal plant, you are looking at the layers of every attempted solution still operating beside one another.
Go learn about some stuff from here. It's a Golden Spike Tower. There's an elevator. I'll see you guys in a bit. I'm gonna come back a little later. What you're looking at over there is the Union Pacific diesel repair factory, fix 'em up.